Melissa Gilbert, born on May 8, 1964, in Los Angeles, entered the world already surrounded by the entertainment industry. Adopted the day after she was born by comedian actor Paul Gilbert and his wife Barbara Crane, her childhood was shaped by a family deeply connected to television and film. Her adoptive parents encouraged creativity and discipline, and Melissa grew up understanding the demands and pressures that came with life in Hollywood. She made her acting debut at just a few years old, appearing in dozens of commercials before she even reached grade school. By the time she was 9, she was already a seasoned child performer, familiar with cameras, scripts, and the fast pace of television production. Her life changed permanently in 1974 when she was cast as Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House on the Prairie. The show became one of the most successful family dramas of all time, and Melissa grew up on nationwide television. Viewers watched the transition from child to teenager week after week, making her one of the most recognizable faces of the era. Behind the scenes, Michael Landon became one of the most influential figures in her life. His strict work ethic, high expectations, and emotional support shaped Gilbert far beyond the set. She considered him a mentor and a father figure, and the responsibility of carrying a lead role at such a young age taught her professionalism, resilience, and emotional maturity. While Little House dominated her childhood and adolescence, Melissa pursued a variety of dramatic projects on the side, including made-for-TV films that allowed her to explore more complex emotions. One of the most significant came in 1979 when she starred as Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker, opposite Patty Duke, who played in Sullivan. Their casting created a unique moment in television history. Melissa stepped into the role that Patty Duke had made iconic in her youth, while Duke transitioned into the mentor role of Helen's teacher. The experience forged a lasting impression on Melissa, though she was too young at the time to fully grasp the depth of what Patty Duke had overcome to reach that point. As Melissa entered adulthood, her acting career expanded into more mature roles, and she became a staple of American television films throughout the 1980s. But her career was only one part of her life. Her personal experiences began to take center stage, revealing challenges that echoed the emotional struggles of many child stars. She married actor Bo Brinkman in 1988, and they welcomed a son, Dakota. The marriage was troubled and brief, marked by instability and emotional strain. Melissa later acknowledged that she lacked the foundation for a healthy relationship at that stage of her life. After divorcing Brinkman, Melissa married actor Bruce Boxleitner in 1995. Their blended family dynamic was complicated but loving, and they had one son together, Michael. While raising her children and navigating married life, Melissa simultaneously dealt with the public pressures of fame, lingering trauma from childhood, and long-ignored emotional wounds. She struggled with alcoholism, insecurities, and burnout, challenges she eventually addressed openly in her memoirs years later. Despite these hardships, Melissa remained active professionally and expanded her influence beyond acting. In 2001, she became president of the Screen Actors Guild. Her leadership focused on advocating for improved working conditions, health care, and fair labor rights for actors. She held the position through significant changes in the entertainment industry, including rapid technological advancements that affected contracts and protections for performers. Her work during this period earned respect even among those who didn't always agree with her politics or approach. The 2000s and early 2010s became periods of major transformation for her. She separated from Boxleitner in 2011 and later married actor and director Timothy Busfield in 2013. Their relationship marked a shift away from the intensity of Hollywood. Melissa relocated with him to small-town life, explaining that she finally found peace away from the entertainment world's constant demands. Living quietly, she began focusing on writing, healing, managing her lifelong back pain issues, and rediscovering comfort outside the spotlight. By the time Melissa Gilbert reached her early 60s, she had accumulated decades of emotional insight and personal growth. Her reflections became more candid, shaped by the loss of her parents, her struggles with addiction, the pressures of fame, and the realization that she had spent much of her life surviving rather than living. It was during this period of clarity and honesty that she finally began speaking openly about her real feelings toward Patty Duke. At 61, Melissa explained that Patty Duke had impacted her life in ways she hadn't fully understood when she was young. Working with Duke on The Miracle Worker had been intense and intimidating, but Melissa later realized that Duke was fighting private battles, ones that Melissa herself would one day relate to. Duke's childhood trauma, her bipolar disorder, and her emotional volatility had shaped the energy she brought to the set. Melissa's reflections were not judgmental. They were compassionate and grounded in decades of lived experience. She finally began telling the real story, not just about Patty Duke as an actress, but about Patty Duke as a human being whom she had once looked up to and later understood in a much deeper way. When Melissa Gilbert finally spoke openly about Patty Duke, she did so with a mixture of admiration, honesty, and emotional clarity that only came with age. At 61, she was no longer the young actress who once stood across from Duke on the set of The Miracle Worker. She had lived through her own struggles, heartbreaks, addictions, and recoveries, and these experiences allowed her to understand Patty Duke in a way she could never have understood as a teenager. The real story she revealed was not rooted in drama or rivalry, but in recognition of the complex, wounded, immensely talented woman Patty Duke truly was. Melissa remembered that working with Duke was intense from the very beginning. Duke approached her role as Sullivan with a mixture of discipline and emotional force, demanding absolute focus from Melissa. Gilbert later explained that at the time, she felt intimidated by Duke's energy and seriousness. Duke had once been the young actress in the spotlight, playing Helen Keller in the original 1962 film. Now, she had stepped into the role of the teacher, watching a young performer recreate the part that had defined her own youth. Melissa admitted that this dynamic created a pressure she did not fully understand at the time. She believed Duke wanted the story to be told with realism and emotional authenticity because it meant so much to her personally. As Melissa grew older, she realized Patty Duke had been carrying enormous private burdens during those years. Duke's early life had been filled with emotional abuse, manipulation, and trauma at the hands of her managers. She became famous at an extremely young age, earning an Oscar at just 16, but the public success hid her internal suffering. By the time she worked with Gilbert, Duke had already endured years of intense psychological struggles and undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Melissa admitted that she had no understanding of mental illness at that age and could not comprehend what Duke was navigating behind the scenes. She later realized that Duke's intensity, mood swings, and unpredictable emotional energy were not signs of unkindness, but symptoms of a deeper illness she kept fighting to control. Melissa explained that one of the most powerful truths she came to understand was how much Patty Duke gave to her performances despite her private pain. Duke pushed herself relentlessly, even on days when her mind was battling her. Gilbert recognized that Duke's dedication to the miracle worker came from a place of deep emotional history, not just professionalism. Duke had lived inside the world of Helen Keller and Sullivan for most of her youth. Returning to it alongside Melissa meant confronting memories, pressures, and expectations that had shaped her identity. Gilbert realized this only decades later, with maturity she did not yet have as a child star. As Melissa reflected on Duke's career, she spoke with admiration about Duke's fearlessness. She explained that Patty Duke was one of the few actresses of a generation who offered complete vulnerability on screen. Duke did not hide behind technique, vanity, or perfection. She gave everything, every emotion, every wound, every fracture of her life, to the role she played. Gilbert admitted that witnessing this level of honesty left a permanent mark on her. It taught her that acting was not simply pretending, it was telling the truth with courage. The most profound part of Melissa Gilbert's revelation at 61 was her acknowledgement that Patty Duke became a symbol of survival for her. Melissa had gone through her own dark periods, alcoholism, broken relationships, professional struggles, and the pressure of being a child star who grew up under the public eye. As she faced her own demons, she found herself relating to Duke in ways she never could have imagined as a teenager. She understood how fame could isolate a young performer, how internal battle could spill into relationships, and how the pressure to appear strong could hide deep vulnerability. Melissa spoke about how Patty Duke eventually became one of the most important mental health advocates of her generation. Once Duke's bipolar disorder was correctly diagnosed in the early 1980s, she openly discussed her struggles in interviews, books, and public appearances. She refused to hide her illness, choosing instead to expose it so others could find hope. Gilbert admired that courage deeply. She said Duke's openness helped countless people, including herself, feel less alone in their emotional difficulties. It gave Melissa a model of bravery, one that she drew strength from in her own healing journeys. Another truth Melissa revealed was how much compassion she felt for Duke as an adult. When she looked back at the young girl she had been, staring across at Patty Duke on set, she realized she had been too inexperienced to understand the weight Duke carried. Now, she sees Duke not as an intimidating figure, but as a woman who did her best while battling forces most people never see. Melissa expressed gratitude that she lived long enough to understand the depth of Duke's struggle and to honor her properly. In her 60s, Melissa Gilbert no longer described Patty Duke only as an actress she once worked with. She described her as a survivor, a pioneer, a woman who fought through darkness to bring light to others. Melissa's truth was not a scandal or revelation of wrongdoing. It was a recognition of Patty Duke's humanity, complexity, and resilience. It was an acknowledgement that the real story was not about Hollywood tension, but about empathy, understanding, and emotional growth. Through this honesty, Melissa finally shared the story she had carried for decades. As Melissa Gilbert continued reflecting on her life at 61, she spoke with clarity about the long-lasting lessons she carried from Patty Duke's journey. She no longer viewed Duke only through the lens of a childhood memory or as a legendary actress she once worked beside. Instead, she saw Patty as a woman whose struggles, triumphs, and courage helped shape the emotional blueprint for her own adulthood. With decades of distance and maturity, Melissa understood that Patty Duke's life had been defined by extremes, extraordinary talent, harsh exploitation, untreated illness, and ultimately, an unbreakable will to survive. By acknowledging these truths, Melissa finally revealed the real story she had kept within her for so many years. One of the most significant realizations Melissa expressed was how much she owed to Patty Duke's openness about mental health. In the 1980s, when Duke bravely revealed her bipolar disorder diagnosis, mental illness was still heavily stigmatized, especially in Hollywood. Duke spoke publicly about her symptoms, her breakdowns, the chaos she endured for decades, and how finally receiving the correct diagnosis saved her life. Melissa later admitted that Duke's honesty helped her understand her own internal battles. Melissa had struggled for years with low self-esteem, drinking, anxiety, and the psychological consequences of growing up on camera. Seeing Patty Duke confront her illness with transparency gave Melissa permission to confront her own wounds rather than hide them. Melissa explained that this shift in perspective was crucial. As she aged, she realized how easy it was to misinterpret the behavior of someone who is suffering internally. Looking back at the Miracle Worker set, Melissa understood that Duke's intensity, mood changes, and emotional force were shaped by trauma and illness, not ego or arrogance. At the time, young Melissa had been overwhelmed by Duke's presence, unsure how to interpret her energy. Decades later, she realized Duke had been carrying pain far heavier than Melissa could have imagined. This understanding softened every memory she had, replacing intimidation with deep empathy. Another important truth Melissa revealed was how Duke's life shaped her views on fame and childhood stardom. Duke had been pushed into the industry as a child, manipulated by abusive handlers, and forced to present a perfect image that concealed deep turmoil. Melissa recognized disturbing parallels with her own childhood. Though not as extreme, she too had been thrust into an adult world far earlier than she was ready. She, like Duke, had been praised, criticized, photographed, and analyzed before she fully understood who she was. This comparison helped Melissa see Duke not as a mentor or adversary, but as someone who understood a world that very few people do, the world of children who are expected to behave like adults for the entertainment of millions. Melissa's appreciation for Duke's resilience became a major theme in her reflections. Duke did not hide her past. She wrote about it, spoke about it, and used her platform to help others. Melissa admired that courage deeply. As Melissa aged, she adopted a similar approach, choosing to be honest about her own struggles instead of maintaining Hollywood polish. She openly discussed her battles with alcoholism, the emotional challenges of being a child star, and the pain she carried from long-standing family issues. Melissa credited Duke as one of the people who unknowingly gave her permission to live truthfully, even when that truth was uncomfortable. Melissa also spoke about how Duke's life became a reminder of the importance of compassion. In earlier years, Melissa had interpreted Duke's behavior through the eyes of a child, thinking Duke was strict, demanding, or overly intense. At 61, she understood that Duke was fighting battles no one could see. This realization changed the way she viewed people in general. She recognized that emotional storms often come from unseen wounds, and she became more patient with herself and others. She explained that Patty Duke taught her, indirectly, that empathy is not optional, it is essential. In her reflections, Melissa also emphasized the importance of legacy. Patty Duke's legacy was not just her Academy Award or her iconic performances. It was a decision to break silence about mental illness, to expose the damage caused by childhood exploitation, and to fight for public understanding. Melissa admired that Duke used a platform to protect others from repeating her experiences. She saw Duke as someone who transformed personal suffering into a tool for healing. By the time Melissa reached her 60s, her understanding of Patty Duke had evolved from admiration to full emotional comprehension. She described Duke as someone who lived with extraordinary courage, someone who endured pain with determination, and someone whose truth helped others survive their own battles. Melissa said that the real story was not about scandal, tension, or rivalry. It was about growth. It was about a young actress who once felt intimidated by a powerful presence, finally seeing behind that presence and recognizing a woman who had been fighting for herself all along. When Melissa Gilbert finally told the truth about Patty Duke, it was not for sensationalism. It was an act of gratitude. She honored Duke not only as a Hollywood icon, but as a survivor whose openness helped countless people, including Melissa herself, find strength. Melissa expressed that Patty Duke would always remain one of the most influential figures in her life, not because of their on-screen partnership, but because Duke's courage became a blueprint for honesty in Melissa's own journey. For Melissa, speaking this truth at 61 was an act of closure, understanding, and respect. It was a moment she connected the experiences of a younger self with the wisdom of her older self. And in doing so, she finally revealed the real story, a story rooted in empathy, admiration, and a profound sense of shared humanity.